In this episode of Grief in Common, we talk about sensitive subjects, including road traffic accidents and life support. If you don't feel comfortable listening to us talk about these, then feel free to skip ahead. Afternoon, Ghislaine, how are you doing?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Angus, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. It's great to have you here. Great to be hosting. So yeah, this is Winston's Wish Grief in Common. So I think today it'd be really great to kind of talk about our experiences of grief, similarities, differences, common themes, anything like that. Just to kind of understand, I suppose, how the experiences of grief can be so common and so different, yet kind of there always is that one underlying theme. And I guess I've always thought that it's quite difficult to kind of find the essence of what that grief theme is. You know, everyone's experience is so different that sometimes it's tough to kind of find what unites us. So do you want to tell me a little bit about your experience?
Sure, yeah. So firstly, completely agree, because I think it's something that's so hard to define, and people often say, how's best to react, or, you know, how should I deal with this? And it's so hard because it's so different for everyone. But yeah, my name's Ghislaine. I lost my dad when I was a week old. So he was in a car accident. He was on his way to work, so we weren't in the car at all. But since then, basically, it's just been me and mum. And then I had my paternal granddad, and one of my aunts lives nearby as well, which is really nice. So we still have that sort of family unit on my dad's side, which is really cool. I guess grief for me is quite niche compared to a lot of people, because it happened when I was so young, and I've never really met anyone who has had a similar experience in that sense. Like, everyone else that I've known has been, you know, at least 10, if not older, when they've lost a parent. So it's a really interesting topic for me, actually, to talk about the similarities and differences there, because it's what I've always known. I've never known anything different. So it's almost weird to think about an alternative to that, if that makes sense.
It must be tough kind of almost not knowing anything other than this experience. And sometimes when you don't know anything else, it's kind of hard to compare what it would have been like otherwise.
Yeah.
So in a way it might, I don't know, I don't want to quote for you, but it sometimes might be harder to identify your grief and kind of disentangling it just from your day-to-day routine. You know, if you've been grieving for so long, at what point are your actions grief, or at what point are they just you, or maybe they're one and the same thing? And it's a tricky one.
But how about yourself? I know that you were a little bit older, right?
So yeah, my experience was much later. So I was 21 and I was home for Easter. So this was April time, and I remember just being at home with my mum. You know, I think my dad was out at work. My siblings didn't live at home anymore. And she was going for a cycle ride with her cycle group, you know, with road cycling, which, you know, she did routinely. I can't remember. I think she might have been training for an event. And I had just been away on a university trip, and I had to do some writing up for it. And she was, you know, really begging me to go with her. She just really wanted me to go. She was like, come on, I'll buy you a coffee. Come on, it'll be nice. And I remember kind of just thinking like, no, I really want to get this done whilst it's fresh in my head. So I'm going to stay at home and just get this done. And she went off. I remember her just kind of walking past my bedroom window with her bike and like knocking on the window, and just waving goodbye with a big old grin on her face. I waved goodbye. And I was at home for an hour or so, and I got a call from work. I was just doing some kitchen board stuff at the time. They asked me to go in. You know, someone didn't turn up for a shift, so they were really short staffed. They were kind of like, look, we really need someone to be here. So I was like, look, fine, I can come in for a few hours, but I do need to get this work done. So I went to work, and I got a call from my brother. He was quite distressed. He said the police had just been to his house, and he was renting his house of my parents at the time, because they bought another house to do up, but they hadn't done it up. So he was renting it at the time. So I think we were slightly unsure what was going on. Were they looking for my dad? Was it they looking for my brother? What was going on? So yeah, they turned up to his house. I think actually he had a call just before that, and they said, we're not going to tell you over the phone. We need you to be here in person when we tell you. And at this point, I tried calling mum. I couldn't get through to her. Kind of felt, okay, something's not right here. So my brother my dad, my other brother and I were all calling each other kind of one at a time, missing each other, blocking each other's numbers. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would call my dad, my brother would be trying to call my dad, so it was so hectic. And found out that she had basically been involved in some sort of incident. We weren't sure at the time what, but she'd been airlifted to St George's Hospital. And so we all kind of got there. My sister was in Australia at the time, so we kind of had to phone her and tell her what was going on. We got into this kind of hospital side room, I suppose. We're told to sit down, weren't sure what we were going to hear, but, you know, the doctor said, look, she's in a better condition than we thought she was going to be in, but, you know, potential severe brain damage. And the next week was a bit of a blur, to be honest. Lots of black coffee and lots of cake at the hospital. And, you know, over the next few months, she didn't really show any sign of improvement. I was away. I was living in Amsterdam at the time. I was kind of coming home every other weekend to see her. But again, unresponsive, just in a kind of neuro rehabilitation unit. And in July the following year, we decided to kind of withdraw life support. My siblings and I had to write kind of letters of best interests. So it wasn't what we wanted. It's, you know, what would mum want in this situation? And we all kind of agreed this was what we wanted, what she would want, sorry. And this was during COVID. So, you know, we were relatively lucky that she could come home for the kind of the week in which that was occurring. You know, all things considered, we got to have that week at home with mum. And in a way, it was great that no visitors were allowed over because of COVID. We just had that like week to ourselves, and it's so surreal. And yeah, that was July 2020. So yeah, for me, it's still very new. It comes in kind of ebbs and flows. I find days when it's kind of quite severe and at the forefront of my mind, whereas other days, I'm pretty jolly. So all these sorts of experiences. Obviously, I'm still figuring everything out.
I think that's something that never stops in a way. It's almost like an ongoing journey where obviously it gets easier and it gets better in some respects, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be, I still have times, and I'm 24 now, so it happened almost 25 years ago. That is a long time.
Yeah.
But I still have days where I'm like in my head about it, and I think about these different things, and I think it's something that's really important to recognize that will probably, never say never, but probably never go away. But it's just like the way that you deal with it, and as you mature with age and stuff, you start to perceive things differently as well. I think that's something for me in the past couple of years I've really noticed there's been a shift on. I don't know if you found that already. I know it's still quite recent.
She came home and died in COVID. At that point, I kind of knew she was going to die anyway. And living in Amsterdam, I was kind of, coming to and fro every other weekend. And there was just a lot of things going on. You know, I was living abroad, another country. That was kind of a weird new experience. I was grieving, I suppose, at that time. I knew she was going to die, but she was still alive. So that was a kind of weird one. It was like a halfway house grieving. And then COVID happened. Had to come home, and I was living back with my sister and dad, and there was just a lot going on. I suppose whilst I had 3 or 4 different things going on that I couldn't disentangle the grief from, you've just had grief from the very beginning. So it's also, I suppose, you're struggling to disentangle grief from your day-to-day life in that sense as well.
Yeah, it's something that I've tried to explain to people before, but I think it's always quite hard to understand. Yeah. It's almost like when you grow up with it literally from pretty much the day you're born, a week after I was born, it's almost like I grieve for the person that I've lost, even though I don't remember them. But then I also grieve for what I know I'm not going to have. And I'm grieving for what I can see my family have lost through their reactions to things and their the way that they tell stories and the way that they talk about my dad. So it's kind of like a really weird way of grieving where you're not remembering the person, but you're sort of grieving for, you might see your friend and the way that they are with their dad, and you'll be like, oh, I wish I had that. And then you kind of have those moments. But you're right, it is kind of, I don't see there as being a difference between my life and my grief. It's very much intertwined because I've never had any different.
you feel like a strong connection to your dad in some sort of way?
I do and I don't. I think it depends really, because sometimes people, like say my mum and my aunt will say to me, "Oh, you look just like your dad when you did that," or you smile like your dad or whatever. So in that sense, I kind of have aspects where I do feel like that. And I know that when he died, my aunt pulled together, I still have it, one of my most prized possessions. She pulled together like a photo album just of his whole life. So I have pictures in there from when he was a baby until when I was born. So the few pictures that we do have, they've always gone out their way to tell me about him and tell me how I'm similar to him, or things that he would have thought about things that I've done and how he'd have been proud of me and whatever. So in a way I have that connection, but I don't think it's obviously not as strong as, say, my connection with my mum, where I've grown up with her, because you can't have a connection with someone that you don't remember, It's a weird, really weird, unique position, I think, to be.
Yeah, of course. You ever have any home videos or anything? Have you heard his voice or?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. So I've heard his voice once. I'm very fortunate in that my dad he was a sportsman, so he used to race a speedway bike, type of motorbike. And we have all these VCR tapes. Some people might not know what a VCR tape is, but it's a retro style videotape, basically. And until I was 14, I think I hadn't watched one, because I don't know what it was. I just felt like I couldn't watch it. And then when I was 14, I had a moment of realization where I thought, I don't even know what he sounds like. I've never heard his voice. And that was such a weird thought for me. And then after that, I did watch one, and it was a bit emotional, but I've not watched them back since. But I think I should at some point. But yeah, so it's a weird thing. I've only heard my dad's voice once, and that was when I was 14. Very strange.
And do you have any sort of other items of your dad that you hold very near to you?
Yeah, I have some of his racing jackets. They're like bomber jackets from the 80s. That's quite cool.
Very cool.
It's got our surname on it.
Yeah.
What else do I have? I have like lots of knickknacks. They're basically all racing stuff, but I've got like a little model of him on a motorbike and things like that. Lots of pictures in the loft. I think we've got some of his trophies and stuff, but other than that, I've not got much really.
Yeah, the more we talk about it, the more I kind of see differences and similarities between us. And your dad, he died when you were very young, and in a way, you have much less there to remember him by. You're probably not going through that same process of forgetting as other people do. I know I am. My sister messaged me the other day, and she was like, someone asked her what mum's favourite meal was, and we didn't know. It's just weird things like that. All of a sudden you think, wow, I can't answer that question. And maybe we'll never know. Yeah, when talking about kind of items of significance, I suppose I have a lot of things that I remember her giving me, or things of hers, or things that I remember her by. And it's really interesting seeing what things take significance. And in a way, I feel like my brain can subconsciously choose, okay, that's special to me, that's special to me, that one that she gave me, not so much. And, in my day-to-day life, these things I stumble upon remind me of Mum. She bought me a lunchbox before I went to uni. Just nothing special, just a red lunchbox from TK Maxx. Like, I absolutely love food, and it was just quite a sweet moment. And that's taken on such significance, just this plastic lunchbox from TK Maxx. So, it's funny how these things play out sometimes.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because my family, they'll often say things like that, or they'll be like, oh no, your dad bought that, don't throw that away. And it would just be some random plate or something, and I'm like, well, it's like, why do we want this? So I know exactly what you mean, but yeah, I guess I don't really have that so much. But do you find, I wanted to ask you a question about having siblings. So I don't have any siblings. I'm an only child. You find that that's been helpful, having them? Do you get to talk to them much about what happened?
We all have very different ways of kind of dealing with it.
Yeah.
you know, my siblings all have partners as well, who they've all met at different sort of stages in their lives. And so we all kind of have different ways of remembering and talking about mum. And, you know, when we're in a big group, some of us may remember mum from a certain situation, some of us might not, some of us never met mum. We have different ways we talk about it and we choose to remember. You know, some of us might be more explicit in kind of what we do. Some of us, you know, much more implicit. Some of us might not say so much on the family, you know, Facebook chat, whereas, you know, other people are a lot more kind of vocal and emotive. And I love that. You know, we all have our different ways of kind of dealing with things and talking about things. And so, yeah, it's helpful that we can really indulge in that sometimes. You know, when you have more siblings, again, it's kind of more occasions and moments in which mum isn't there, if that makes sense. You know, so my brother got married a year ago and mum wasn't there, and my other brother had a kid a few months ago, my mum wasn't there. And it's these sorts of moments that are going to kind of keep on rolling through that mum's not going to be there for. So, you know, maybe it'll get easier, maybe it'll get harder, but yeah, it's a kind of constant stream of talking and moments in which we can remember mum.
Yeah, I think big life events, that's something that's always been in my mind, because you know that it's going to happen at some point, you know, and I think they will probably always be difficult. I doubt, for me anyway, personally, I doubt that will change, thinking about kind of marriage and kids and stuff. But it is interesting. It goes back to what we sort of briefly spoke about earlier about bringing new people into the family or meeting new friends versus having to tell people you already know. It's kind of like a weird dynamic. I don't know how you feel about this, but like me growing up again, because I was so young, everyone I've met has been a new friend or a new partner, whatever. So I've never really had to experience going back and telling someone that I already knew, like say a friend from school or whatever. Do you find that there's a difference for you? So like, say when you meet new people, do you find it easier, harder than telling your old friends?
Yeah, I think with new people, I'm always dreading the question, oh, so where do your parents live? Or something. And I suppose I could just say, oh, you know, over here. Or, you know, when they ask, oh, what do your parents do? I could say, oh, you know, dad does this, mum does that. But then it would feel kind of like lying. And I always don't want to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because I don't want them to be like, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have asked. It's like, it's fine. You can ask. I don't want to make a big deal of it. She died. That's that. Like, you can ask me about it if you want, but frankly, it's not really something I want to bring up.
Yeah.
Not because I find it difficult to talk about, you know, from it. I wouldn't be here, I suppose, if I did, but, or maybe I would. But, yeah, I think sometimes I just don't want to have that awkward conversation with new people about it. But, you know, it will inevitably come up. And sometimes people are, I suppose I can't be too hard on people, but sometimes people are absolutely great with it. And other times,
Yeah.
it could be slightly, and again, they don't know how to react. It's quite an awkward thing, but sometimes they can be quite annoying about it. I remember working at this bar one time, and this lady was saying, you know, she actually specifically asked, "And what does your mum do?" And I was like, "Well, she was this," and then they're like, "What does she do now?" And I said, "Well, she doesn't do anything now, unfortunately, because she's died."
Yeah.
And this lady just started tearing up, and it's a bit like, that's really sweet of you to care, but I don't want to have to deal with this right now.
Yeah.
With old friends, old people, it's fine. Again, I think it's quite an awkward thing for people to discuss. And I sometimes feel a responsibility to make it not awkward. I don't know whether I like that or dislike that. It's just one of those things. But yeah, bringing it back to what you said about the big life moments and how you're going to be missing your dad then. When mum died, I was thinking, I don't think it's going to be the big moments I'm going to miss. I think it's going to be the little small moments. It's the coffees on the morning, or it's the little text here and there. And I think that definitely was the case at first. But as time's gone on, the bigger moments have become more significant. And unfortunately, you know, when my birthday is coming up or Christmas is coming up, I really do dread it. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? What sort of moments do you find most poignant, or do you find most difficult, or surprisingly easy, surprisingly hard?
So I think it's a weird one for me, because some things really don't bother me at all. You know, like say Father's Day, I honestly couldn't care less. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
faze me at all. And then things like Christmas and birthdays, again, it's kind of like I've never had it. So for me, it's the normal. But then at the same time, I do also have moments where I might be celebrating someone else's birthday and I think, oh, I wish that my dad was there, like their dad is here now, or, it kind of comes in waves. So as a whole, it doesn't really affect me other than big events like marriage, kids, whatever, because then that's when I think the whole family should be there. And, I'd love my future kids to have grandparents on both sides and things like that. And I don't know, yeah, it's kind of, it just completely depends on my mood. But I think especially as you get older, as I've gotten older, and you start thinking about the next steps in your life, and even just not necessarily marriage and kids, but with job opportunities and promotions and things like that, you kind of think, I wish that I could share this with them and see what they thought and have a chat about it.
Was it the 5 stages of grief? Denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, or something like that.
I can never remember.
But they say they go in all sorts of orders, all sorts of times. In hindsight, I definitely went through those. When I was abroad in Amsterdam, just after the accident, I was so angry, just with everything. And I was going to the gym like 4 times a week. I was, boxing once or twice a week. And I'm not that sort of person, but for me, it was just that physical, the physical outlet. Like I've always loved exercise. I've like running and climbing and cycling and that sort of stuff. Never the kind of high impact sort of things, but that's really what I was craving. And for me, it was an anger outlet. This might be a silly question, but do you ever have that?
Yeah, I think maybe when I was younger, and definitely actually when I was a teenager, I felt like I just resented what happened to me. And I've kind of, in the past few years, I've really tried to shift the way that I've thought about it, because I used to be very, oh, woe is me, this has happened. Why has it happened? That's not fair. And especially like I'd constantly compare myself to my friends, who none of them have lost parents. None of my friends now have lost parents. So it was kind of like I was constantly comparing my situation to others. And then that in turn was making me angry. Of course, I was very happy for them.
Yeah.
But it was jealousy, I guess, and envy. And in the past few years, I've really tried to just think, this happening led to this happening, which is a good thing, and then that happened, which is a good thing, and then this. So I tried to sort of focus on positive aspects that have come out of it, if that makes sense. So it's like the butterfly effect, where there's multiple different things that can happen, and I always find that really interesting, and that's really helped me to actually process. So I'm not so angry anymore, but I definitely did have that when I was younger.
That's great to hear. I do similar things. Part of the reason I'm here with Winston's Wish is that I wanted to make a positive out of this situation. I wanted to generate some sort of good that wouldn't have been done otherwise. And if I can use this experience to help others, then that's great. Talking about your teenage years, and I suppose, and I just wondering if you've ever had a moment like that. Has there sort of been a specific period of your life where you really struggled with your dad not being there?
Yeah, there definitely was. I would say it was probably around A-level time. So when things were kind of ramping up, my school, they were a great school, but they put a lot of pressure on us. And I think everything just built up. So I focused so much on doing well in school and just funneled basically all my energy into that I then didn't really do much outside of it. So then when I left school, and I still kind of had all this anger going on at that time, I then started work and I did an apprenticeship. So I didn't go to uni, I did like a degree part-time outside of work. And then I did exactly the same thing, where I just funneled all my energy into my work. And I guess it was like a coping mechanism in a way, where I was kind of shutting that part off, and I was like, just don't think about it. And then, it's fine. You don't need to think about your emotions. It's all good. classic coping mechanism. And then, it kind of all bubbled up. And then after that, I just thought something has to change. You have to start processing things a bit better, and that's what I tried to do, and it's helped so far. So thinking about that sort of positive out of the negative has really helped me personally.
Yeah. And I definitely have those sorts of moments as well, where I kind of push it to the back of my mind and try not to think about it. And I didn't know I was doing it at first, but now I've gotten onto it, and I kind of try and make sure that I do deal with the feelings when they come up, because it happens on the 2-week scale where I've kind of not been thinking about it, and then I'll have a pretty glum Sunday afternoon or something like that, or it could be on a 3 or 4 month schedule, I suppose, where I've clearly not been engaging with it enough, where I've been keeping myself busy because it feels good when I'm doing it. It feels good when I'm non-stop, but actually you're not quite dealing with the things going on. And, after 3 or 4 months of doing that, it sometimes does catch up to me, and I'll have a pretty sorry 4 or 5 days.
That's exactly how it was for me. I always describe it, this is such a nerdy thing to say, I did economics at A-level, and it was something called like the cyclical economic graph or something like that. So it was curvy, and then there was a line through the middle. So the line was like your average, how I described it was like your average mindset. And then sometimes I'd be great, and then I'll be like a month, and then other times it would dip below that median line, and then I'd just feel awful, and all the feelings sort of came back. And it's really interesting to hear you say that as well, actually, because it was sort of on a 3-month cycle or so. I definitely recommend talking about it, because the minute I did that, it alleviated a lot of that sort of up and down. And now I don't really do that much. Now I'm quite good to talk about it. I used to never talk to anyone about it. Even people that I'd known for, say, 5 years, they knew something was up, because I'd only ever talk about my mum, or, around other friends that knew, I'd be like, oh yeah, my dad used to do that, whatever. But they never knew what actually happened. And then now I don't care that much. I've just forced myself to just say, like, oh yeah, my dad's dead. It's no big deal. So I tell people at work and stuff now, whereas before I really hid that. And sometimes, like you said earlier, they do get uncomfortable, and they just kind of like, I've had people tear up. I've had people say some pretty horrible things as well, to be honest. You should be over it by now. It was a long time ago. I've had, maybe he deserved it. Why he would say that, I have no idea, but there you go, I've had that. And then you also just get the sort of, oh, sorry, and then they just sort of turn around and do their own thing.
People don't know how to react. I think, we try to avoid the conversation and the thought of death so much because it scares us so much. Even when we talk about it with people, some people, justifiably so, don't like to say the word death, and that's fine. But, I do like to say it, because I think it's not hiding the fact, this is what it is. Let's just talk about it in the most real terms.
Yeah, that's one of those things that also just doesn't faze me at all. I think, again, because I grew up with it. I know when you tell a child that their parents passed away, I think you do, from what I hear, you have to just be really honest with them and just be like, look, this is what's happened. You're not going to see them again, because that's how their brains work, and you have to sort of tell them directly so that they don't get confused. So I think I've always kind of had that, obviously very emotional and caring, but direct conversation about it, where people say, no, he's dead. So I've never really had any thoughts on sort of triggering words or anything like that. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Do you feel that way as well?
Those triggering things are interesting. I don't ever want people necessarily hiding conversation. People will make comments in day-to-day life, and I don't want people having to sort of censor what they're saying just because I'm there. Obviously, there's taking care and being cautious, but, for example, maybe for you as well, my mum was unfortunately hit by a car whilst on a bike. Sometimes, people get really annoyed at cyclists on the road, and they'll say, I've heard comments like, I was driving, this cyclist was in the road, I just wanted to knock him off. And it's stuff like those comments like that kind of really, really grind my gears. But equally, how are people supposed to know, what's happened and why they shouldn't say it? But, there's certain, I remember this advert, it was on the TV recently. It was for insurance or something, or speed on the motorways. I think it was like a point of view shot of a cyclist getting hit by a car. And that was horrible. I remember wincing because it was so unassuming, and in the classic way those adverts are, that they're kind of all happy-go-lucky, and then it's just bam, something switches, and it's that shock factor. And I remember being really taken aback and really kind of shook up for like a few minutes. It was just, because it wasn't in my mind at all. And then I kind of went on to think about it more, I don't know, philosophically, I suppose, and just thinking like, actually, that's the nature of these things sometimes.
And actually, now that you said that, you've just reminded me that I don't know, it's a bit weird. I'm all right sometimes, but when my dad was in a car accident, I find it hard to watch really graphic images of car accidents and things like that. And I remember, I don't know if they do this everywhere, but my school, when I was in year 12, they used to do an annual trip out to some kind of centre where they basically talk to you about driving safely and things like that. I remember I couldn't go, and I was the only person that didn't go. And I remember I had to go and tell my head of year that I wasn't going and why I wasn't going. And she was like, why? Why aren't you going? It's mandatory. You have to go. And I was like, oh, well, my dad died in a car accident. And she instantly was like, oh, okay, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. Okay, that's fine. If I were to give anyone advice, I'd say if you're close enough with someone, then it's okay. Just say, is it all right if I ask you this? Or is it all right that I said this to you when you were talking to me about your dad or whatever? Because where everyone's so different, you get to know that person on a deeper level, and you get to ask them what they're actually triggered by or not triggered by or whatever. And in doing that, you're allowing yourself to get those deeper connections. I think there's so many times where people want to ask questions, but they feel like they can't. And that's fine, it's understandable. But at the end of the day, I think we're all people. And if we want to not talk about something, we'll say, I don't want to talk about it. And that's fine. If anyone I know is watching this, feel free to ask. It's fine. If I don't want to talk about it, I'll say no. But yeah. Grief is a strange thing, but...
Yeah, maybe that's what it has in common.
Yes.
Strangeness. Ghislaine, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate that. It's really been eye-opening for me. I know you and I have spoken briefly before, but it's always been in a larger group. And I specifically remember hearing about your story and really reflecting on it a few weeks back, just thinking actually how different experiences of grief can be. My grief is so much defined by what I had, now what I don't have, and it's so stark. And even day to day, I'm forgetting things, and I'm, seeing these cues of things that I don't have anymore. Mums dropping their kids off at school, stuff like that, and it all kind of reminds me of these moments I did have. And yeah, it's been super insightful just to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, because this has been super interesting for me as well. I think something that's very close to my heart is being able to talk about the differences between losing someone when you're younger versus when you're a bit older. It's nice to actually get to know you a little bit better and to actually have that deeper conversation as well. So I appreciate you sharing that with me.
No, not at all. And yeah, I often find myself way into my head with things sometimes, and thinking about grief and thinking about what actually is it that grief has in common. We all have such different experiences. What is that one thing that unites us? Maybe there is no one essence of grief, but it's a shared experience somehow. And I've found it really, really genuinely insightful talking to you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it's hard to define what one thing is in common between all of us, but I think it is just the essence of grief that we all have in common. So yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Grief in Common is a podcast run by the Winston's Wish Youth team. The topics of conversation aim to provide comfort and make a difference to other young grieving people over the age of 13.
We hope to give listeners the confidence to talk about their own grief journey.
It's rare to be able to listen to other young people being open and honest about their grief and how they're feeling.
We hope this podcast reaches young grieving people everywhere and helps them to feel less alone.
From teenagers to young adults, students to professionals, we're all different, but we've all got grief in common.
Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you.